Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning into my channel. I am Tristian Gabriel, and today I am delighted to have a very special guest, someone who I respect very much, his knowledge, his insight, and his dedication for scholasticism, none other than Jacob Ehrman. And today we're going to be discussing a very important topic, the authenticity of the Pauline epistles. And I just want to learn something from you, Jacob. I've been a fan of your channel. I've learned from your channel, and anybody here that's listening, you need to subscribe because he's definitely a voice in scholasticism. So thank you so very much, Jacob, for appearing on my podcast. And I would absolutely love for you just to simply have your liberty and just teach me, man, because you're somebody who I definitely highly regard. So thank you for coming on, and your availability and your time.
Well, thank you, Tristan. I'm delighted to be here. And I think a good place to start is I just want to describe briefly what the standard view is. So the standard view is that at least 7 out of the 13 epistles that are attributed to Paul, some say 14 if you want to include Hebrews. I'm not going to discuss Hebrews too much tonight, but looking at the 7 letters, they look at 7 letters as being genuine out of the 13 that are specifically attributed to Paul. The other thing that's important to note is that 8 out of 13 of those letters are co-authored, yet most people don't pay attention to that detail. 8 out of 13 of the epistles they admit that they are multi-authored texts, like 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians. 1 and 2 Thessalonians have 3 authors, Paul, Silas, and Timothy. And the reason why that's important is because the Dutch radical scholars will point out, scholars like Robert Price will point out that the letters conflict with one another. Sometimes they'll conflict with themselves. My take on it is that's because co-authors with different viewpoints can be explained. The text is already telling you that. So it's not a theory. It's not merely an opinion. It actually is there in plain view. You can read the beginning of 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, etc. You can read the beginning of those letters and you can see that they are co-authored texts. Romans is co-authored, but the co-author doesn't show up until Romans 16. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, because in the standard view, they'll say that only 7 letters are authentic, like Romans, Galatians, 1 Thessalonians, Philemon, and they'll say that those 1st, 2nd Corinthians too. So they'll say that those letters are the only ones that are genuine because they compare it with the other letters and they say there's stylistic differences, there's theological differences. 1st, 2nd Thessalonians conflict with each other on eschatology. But when you incorporate what the letters are telling you, that okay, look, we're multi-authored over here, it actually simplifies the situation, makes it less complicated, because what's really going on is the co-authors will input their inputs into the text, and what helps figure out which parts of it that the co-authors wrote is when you take those letters and you compare them to the other 5 single-authored ones: Ephesians, Galatians, Titus, 1st, 2nd Timothy. Those 5 letters are the only ones that are attributed to Paul alone. But we'll come back to that a little bit because there's another point that I want to make. What is our earliest evidence for a historical Paul outside the New Testament? Clement, 1st Clement, which I've now come to believe was written slightly earlier. I went back and forth and say, oh, it's like maybe between 94 and 95. But it's more like 93 CE. And the reason why I think it's probably in 93 is because when you read 1st Clement, it talks about a sudden persecution that has befallen us. It's like some kind of persecution had just begun, and the letter was written in near immediacy or practical immediacy to when it began, and that was the Domitianic persecution, because there was 2 Domitian persecutions. There was a second one that began in 93, in which he was persecuting the philosophers. The first one was also about that. So the second Domitian purge was underway, and this would cause him to be assassinated 3 years later, 96. And I'll come back to that in a second. But when you look at First Clement, what does Clement say about Paul? He wrote a letter. The Greek word he uses is epistolon, a letter. He doesn't say epistoles, which is plural letters. That's the word that Second Peter uses, because Second Peter knows all 13 of letters, so that's why he's saying letters. I know more than one letter. But Clement's not that specific. Now, some have tried to argue against me and try to say that, no, despite the fact it is using a word indicates a singular letter, it's still implying plural. I'm like, no, it's not. The other problem is that First Clement actually contradicts the canonical text in a couple of major ways. One of those ways is Fortunatus. Fortunatus is a character that briefly appears in 1 Corinthians. He shows up in the second to last verse of 1 Clement. And the problem here is that he's alive. And he's living decades later than he should be. That is kind of strange, because if this is supposed to be somebody that is a contemporary with a historical Paul, what's he doing being alive in Clement's day? And just so everybody understands what I'm talking about, I'll read 1 Corinthians 16:17. It says, I was glad with Stephanos, Fortunatus, and Achaicus arrived, because they had supplied what was lacking from you. So they refreshed my spirit, and yours also. Such men deserve recognition. So in 1 Corinthians, he's a co-worker with Paul. We say, okay, so he knows him. They're in contact with one another. They're connected to one another. That's made clear. And what I want to do is, I think this would be the best moment for me to actually show some slides. That way everybody can see exactly what I'm talking about. So I got it up on the screen right here. So Tristian, if you can pull it up. Okay. So Clement says that Paul wrote a letter, and when he quotes this letter, it appears to be in agreement with small parts of 1 Corinthians, but he does not mention other epistles attributed to Paul. So you've got 1 Clement 47, 1-3. Take up the epistle of the blessed Paul the apostle, what wrote he first unto you in the beginning of the gospel, of a truth that he charged you in the spirit concerning himself and Cephas and Apollos, because that even then ye had made parties. So Clement is describing a letter in which Paul is complaining about division in the church in his day. You see the same kind of thing in our 1 Corinthians. This is very true. But what Clement fails to tell you is there's no mention of Sophanes. Sophanes co-wrote 1 Corinthians. He's not here. Clement never mentioned Sophanes. In fact, not only does he not mention Sophanes, he never mentions Timothy, Silas, nor Tertius in his entire letter. It's almost like he has no idea who they are. I'm not saying he has no idea who they are, but he doesn't connect them to the original historical Paul. So now we got Fortunatus. You remember, I just read that Fortunatus is in 1 Corinthians as an associate with Paul, just to get everybody on board here. 1 Corinthians portrays Fortunatus as a contemporary and a co-worker with Paul. Now, 1 Clement 65:1, that's what I was talking about earlier, contradicts that. It says, now send ye back speedily unto us our messengers, Claudius Ephebus and Valerius Bito, together with Fortunatus also in peace and with joy, to the end that they may the more quickly report the peace in concord which is prayed for and earnestly desired by us, that we also may the more speedily rejoice over your good order. Now, what is the problem here? Let's go to the next one. So here I compare the verses on the screen, so y'all can see for yourselves that there's a serious issue here. Who are we to believe? On the right, we have 1 Corinthians portraying Fortunatus as a contemporary and a co-worker with the historical Paul. In 1 Clement, it's the opposite. Fortunatus, the same guy, is living 50 years, 60 years after Paul's day. What is he doing in the 90s? Working with, like, literally being an associate with Clement. It's the same guy, and Clement has no idea that he was a contemporary with Paul. He never mentions this because Clement praises Paul. Paul is his hero. He would have said, Fortunatus knew my hero. He worked with Paul. He never says that. So how does Clement, if he read our First Corinthians, which is the standard view, they claim that Clement read First Corinthians as we have it because he seems to describe part of it, then how did he miss this? That's the point that I'm trying to make here. This is one of the major contradictions that I'm talking about.
So why the difference? Where do we go from here? I mean, it's apparently you've made a strong argument, and I've never heard this before, but what you're presenting is definitely a strong argument. So why is this a contradiction? What is it? Fiction? Is it somebody making stuff up? I mean, what is it?
It's a good question. So what's going on here is that Fortunatus is being taken from one Clement. This is what I think. I think First Corinthians is dependent on First Clement, and Fortunatus is being taken from that letter and integrated into Paul's story. But that also brings me to a larger point that you have the Domitianic persecution. You know the character called the son of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians, somebody that's going to claim to be, he's claiming to be a son of God, and he's persecuting the church. Well, who does that in the first century? There's really only one person that fits that description. It's Emperor Domitian. Now, some will argue it's Caligula, because Caligula wanted to put an image of himself inside the temple. And the issue there is, of course, if you look at ecclesiastical literature, you look at the church fathers, there are no martyrdom traditions connected to Caligula. Nobody says that Christians were killed by Caligula. Nobody says this. Nobody says there were people martyred under him. They connect that to Domitian or Nero. They don't connect it to Caligula. Now, Domitian is the one that's claiming divinity here. Caligula also did too, but the difference with Domitian is he's claiming to be a son of a god, whereas Caligula claimed to be a god directly. Domitian had Clement, the author of this very letter we're talking about, killed in 95. So that's how he connects to Clement. In 95 CE, Titus Flavius Clemens was executed. Now, in much later literature, we're told to believe that Bishop Clement of Rome was a relative of the other Clement, conveniently, and it's Eusebius that comes up with that stuff in the 4th century. Before Eusebius, nobody said that they were two different people, or that Clement died later, as far as I can tell. Eusebius seems to be trying to split them up for some reason, while also admitting that they're connected. The implication is that one of the first bishops of Rome, supposedly, is actually a relative of Caesar's household, of Caesar's family. If you read Cassius Dio says that Clemens was killed because he succumbed to Jewish ways. He actually says that. A major Roman historian says that Titus Flavius Clemens, the consul, was killed for converting to Jewish ways. So what I'll do is I'm gonna pull that down the PowerPoint, and I actually have it in the PowerPoint. Okay, let me go forward then. Here it is, right here. At this time, the road leading from Sinusa to Puteoli was paved with stone, and the same year Domitian slew along with many others Flavius Clemens the consul, although he was a cousin and had to wife Flavia Domitilla, who was also a relative of the emperor's. The charge brought against them both was that of atheism, a charge on which many others who drifted into Jewish ways were condemned. Is that interesting? So you have a consul, Titus Flavius Clemens, succumbing to Jewish ways. And notice at the bottom here, where my mouse is, close to the bottom, you have this Epaphroditus, Nero's freedman, being slain. Well, that is all very interesting, because if you look at Philippians, guess who's in Philippians? A Clement and an Epaphroditus. They're both there. So in Philippians, they are mentioned. But that doesn't make sense if this was written in the 50s, 40s, like 30s. But if it's in the 90s, then this connects very nicely. Here's another major contradiction that we have to deal with here. So going back a couple of slides. First Clement chapter 5. But not to dwell upon ancient examples, let us come to the most recent spiritual heroes. And I highlighted Peter and Paul. Those are the ones that he's talking about there. You can tell that he's not claiming to be a contemporary of them. He's claiming to live long after. Yet in Philippians 4:3, it says, and I entreat thee also, true yokefellow, help those women which labored with me and the gospel with Clement also, and with other my fellow laborers whose names are in the book of life. Now, hold on. You could probably tell that there's a problem here already. In Philippians, Clement knows Paul. In First Clement, Clement is never met Paul and is living after Paul's death by several decades. So which is it? Is he a co-worker with Paul? Or is he referring to Paul as a distant example? Can't be both. And so the issue here, the implications here, is that in the Paul of the letters is a different person from the one he's talking about. That's the only way this works.
Well, let me ask you, what are some sources? What are some critical scholars saying on this? Like, who could we appeal to that has been bringing up similar points that you've presented?
Well, there's not many, because again, there's so much. They're so ingrained right now with the standard view that you have 7 letters in the mid-1st century. So there's really not many. There is one scholar I can recommend. A couple scholars I can recommend is Robert Price. He rejects all the letters for different reasons to myself, but he rejects the letters as being genuine. The Amazing Colossal Apostle is a good book to read on that. You also have Nina Livesey's book. Let me bring both books out so I can show you.
Sure. Thank you guys for tuning in, by the way. Already learned something that I've never heard before, and many of you guys in the audience, I see some of your comments. We have so similar to the accusation of Socrates. And then we have another person here, gentlemen. 90 CE seems about right. I think it's probably the 80 CE for the earliest Pauline epistles. But Jacob, you wanted to present something?
Yeah, so this is the Amazing Colossal Apostle by Price.
Okay.
And in which he rejects all the letters. He goes into the reasons why he does. Right. And this is Nina Livesey's book, which was published by Cambridge University Press, by the way. The Letters of Paul in their Roman literary context, reassessing apostolic authorship. So both these books, in this book, she also rejects all the letters of Paul, but she goes further than I do. She thinks that Paul probably might not even have existed as a historical figure.
Oh, wow.
So yes, there are scholars out there. There's also David Trobish. Recommend him as well. He also rejects the letters as being genuine. He doesn't think any of them are. So it's out there. It's slowly spreading in scholarship. Again, this is the idea that none of the letters of Paul are authentic is a very old idea. It does go back like 18th, 19th centuries. But the other important thing I do want to tell people, and this is something that I've been saying for a while, is you do have people out there that kind of like misuse the argument from authority, and it's a reason why that's taught in college as a fallacy. Because when you dig in to scholarship enough, you're going to find all kinds of conflicting viewpoints. I bring on scholars who don't agree with each other. Sometimes sometimes they might not agree with each other on almost anything. That can happen.
Yeah.
And so the issue here is, okay, so you have to delineate and come to your own opinion about what you think is probably true. And that's why I often try to remind people that you have to come to your own conclusion. I could have a scholar on that puts the Gospel of John in the 90s. I could have a scholar that comes on, puts it in the 130s to 150s. It's happened. I've had scholars on that think the 4 Gospels know Josephus. I've had scholars on that put almost all the Gospels before Josephus. You see my point? So you have to come to grips with massively conflicting views.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. You have to. That's what this is all about. I want to bring these different opinions to the table so people can learn with me and decide for themselves what they think is true. That's what I do.
Well, let me go ahead and play the advocate of the conservative evangelical Christian paradigm, who are going to say that Paul's letters are in fact authentic and, you know, maybe inspired ontologically by the Holy Spirit. What do we say to that? What do we say to those, you know, just the pushback in the most simplistic terms to that conservative view of, you know, the authenticity of Paul's? Like, what do we say to those who hold that view?
Before I respond to that question, there are scholars out there like Robert Eisman who do identify Titus Flavius Clemens with the Clement in Philippians and Epaphroditus being Josephus' Epaphroditus. Just want to throw a reference out there. I recommend his books, James the Brother of Jesus and the New Testament Code, for that stuff. But to answer your question, I just want to ask, why would Clement not know about it? Why would he not speak of it? If what they say is true, why would Clement not tell us about these amazing 13 letters being written by Paul? Why does he not say anything about it? If what they say is true and they're so confident, why does Clement not know about it? How could Clement somehow forget that he worked with Paul? How could he not know that Fortunatus also worked with Paul? These are two massive contradictions that cannot be overcome. They cannot be. They just can't. There's no way to make that work.
Yeah. Well, I could already hear what they would say in response. Well, Clement is not canonical. Clement is not inspired. You know, what do we say with that? Yeah, what do we say with that response? Because when you know, the evangelical Christian world, even with theologians, that I could already hear that's the common response. Well, that's just extra biblical literature. That's not inspired. What do we say with that?
I would say that councils voted on what was to be inspired and what was not. Men decided that. Human beings decided that anyway. So you're presupposing in divine inspiration behind what was actually voted on.
Right.
So then you'd have to I have to ask, is there proof? What proof do you have that this stuff was inspired? What methodology can you show me to prove to me that this stuff was inspired? You can't do it.
Oh, brother, that's because you don't have faith.
Right.
That's the next one.
Another thing that to try to say, and it's another desperate cop out, is to say that the Clement that wrote this letter is not the guy in Philippians. It's also, and then I have to believe on top of that Fortunatus and Clement is a different Fortunatus from 1 Corinthians, despite the fact I've shown earlier. I showed the slides that 1 Clement and 1 Corinthians are intricately connected. There's a direct relationship between the material that's there and with Clement. So you can't argue. You cannot argue it's a coincidence. It does not.
Wow. That's interesting, you know, because I remember years ago, I was writing a paper in seminary, and there was a scholar who believed that when Paul rebuked Peter, that Peter was not the apostle Peter that Paul rebuked. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but that Peter was a common name during that time. And so the conservative evangelical Christian who's like, look, Paul withstood Peter to his face. They'll state like, well, it was a man named Peter, but it wasn't the apostle Peter. And so you can kind of feel like, kind of feel that type of, that same perspective. Well, here you have the same names because, just like how there's a whole bunch of different Michaels, there's a whole bunch of different Jacob, there's a whole different Peters, so that's what they'll try to pull it. And it's just epistemically speaking, yeah, you can make those claims, but I think that the evidence that you presented is pretty solid. I think that, even the scholarship that you presented, I think this is like groundbreaking in my opinion. This is really, really good information. I do want to get to some of the questions, but by all means, go ahead, bring up some more points.
Well, one more point I'll bring up before we get to the questions is that Clement is interesting because Clement is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, Clement is evidence, very powerful evidence that there was a real person called Paul that lived many decades earlier in time, and I would argue even earlier than the Standard View claims. I would say that I have reasons to suspect that the real Paul the Apostle was killed in 39 CE. We'll get to that a little later. I'm also going to show evidence that the entire narrative of Paul's death by Emperor Nero and the Acts of Paul was actually a plagiarism from a character that suffered a similar fate in Josephus. I'm going to show all that. But yeah, let's go ahead and get to your questions. I'll pull the PowerPoint down for now. We'll get back to it later.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and see here. You guys that are in the chat, by all means, throw in your questions, you guys. These are interesting points, and in my opinion, this is groundbreaking. And who knows what's gonna, how this is gonna develop and shape it in scholarship. Jacob, I think even the sources that you presented are great, credible. Let's see here. We have. I think we got to this one already. Okay, right here. Why do the letters point to a different time than 80 or 90 CE for Paul's existence?
So like I said, like I was trying to indicate earlier, that when you look at 1 Clement, he does not connect the 13 letters to the historical Paul. When you get to what we see in the epistles, it points to a time that is different. Now, I feel like this is the moment in which I need to bring up Jerome, Church Father Jerome. This is coming from a separate PowerPoint that I've used. Go ahead and pull it up on the screen. I got it ready. All right. This is what Jerome says about the author of our letters, okay? On Famous Men 5:5, Paul, formerly called Saul, an apostle outside of a number of the 12 apostles, was of the tribe of Benjamin and the town of Gascala in Judea. Notice it says that this guy is from the town of Gascala. When this was taken by the Romans, he removed with his parents to Tarsus in Cilicia, sent by them to Jerusalem to study law. He was educated by Gamaliel, a most learned man whom Luke mentions. Now, I want all of you to think about this very carefully here. Do you realize what Jerome just said here? Saul of Gascala's major activities was after the war. He fled with his family from Gascala to Tarsus. When was Gascala taken from the Romans? In the 1st century. 67 CE. Think about that for a second. 67 CE is when that happened. This is already in major violation of the Standard View. Now, the other thing that gets even stranger is how was he taught by Gamaliel after the Jewish war? How does that work? Because the Standard View is that, well, Acts talks about Paul was taught by Gamaliel the first in the late 40s, early 50s, because he died at 52 CE, so it couldn't be any later than that. Oh, but if you look it up, there was another Gamaliel, Tristian. Gamaliel II put in power the Sanhedrin in the year 80. That's what this is. That's what is being discussed here. Now, when we go to the next thing and Jerome's commentary on Philemon, excuse me. Jerome connects Epaphras as being the origin of how he knows about this. So he got this information from Epaphras, aka Epaphroditus. He says here, we have received the following story about this Epaphras, Paul's fellow prisoner. And he kind of repeats what he said before in On Famous Men about Giscala, Tarsus, Jews were dispersed into the world, etc. He's a little bit more descriptive in some ways. Jews were dispersed into the world. That's what happened about the time of Saul of Giscala's ministry having begun. Again, this is not the same Paul that Clement's talking about. This is a very different person. And he's living after the war. He lives past Nero. He outlives Nero. And notice that by implication, Jerome is connecting this man to the authorship of the letters. He kind of knows that. He doesn't really know what to make of it either. Notice here, but he kind of tries to push it to the side. Like, oh, this is something that I heard about Epaphras. This is a story that was passed down. Because the reason why he's doing that is because Jerome states elsewhere in his writings that Paul was killed at the hands of Nero. So he knows that this is contradicting what he's saying in his major writings. There's a New Testament scholar named Charles Travers Wood. I think he lived in the early 20th century, late 19th century. I can't remember, but somewhere around there. It's going to be in my paper, my forthcoming paper. Charles Travers Wood talked about this. He didn't know what to make of it. He put it in the footnote in his book. He footnoted this and moved on, left it alone. So there is an awareness that there is a problem there's a serious problem with what Jerome is talking about here, because it completely contradicts the standard view. Epaphroditus seems to have written a document that's lost, that has some similarities to Acts. It has overlaps to Acts. And it's from that text that Jerome is getting his information from. And so this person, to answer Storytime Jesus' question, to finish my answer, Jerome, Saul of Giscala, I believe, is the author of our letters. He's the one calling himself Paul in the epistles, and he's working with the co-authors in the 90s. This guy is the one I think is behind our letters. This makes sense with 1 Thessalonians 2:13-16. Let me see here.
2:16, you said?
Yeah, I got it in the document. I'm just going to pull it down and switch to slide 27, and then I'll put it back up on the screen.
Okay.
Oh, actually, it looks like it's already there. All right, so I'll read both. There's a reference in 1 Thessalonians, another one in 1 Corinthians. Both of these are very important. So I'll start with the first one. We also constantly give thanks to God for this, that when we received the word of God that you heard from us, you accepted it not as a human word, he has a human word of God, but you heard from us. You accepted it not. Let me start over. We also constantly give thanks to God for this, that when you received the word of God, that you learned, that you heard from us, you accepted it not as a human word, but as what it really is, God's word, which is also at work in you believers. For you, brothers and sisters, became imitators of the churches of God in Christ Jesus that are in Judea. For you suffered the same things from your own compatriots, as they did from the Jews, who killed both the Lord Jesus and the prophets and drove us out. They displease God and oppose everyone by hindering us from speaking to the Gentiles so they may be saved. Thus, they have constantly been filling up the measure of their sins. The wrath has overtaken them at last. But what wrath could that possibly be? Oh, I wonder. 70 CE? The utter destruction of the temple and all of Judea? Some scholars recognize that this is the case. So Tristian, how do they deal with that? I criticize this in my paper. Oh, it's an interpolation. No. Show me the manuscript evidence to prove it's an interpolation, then I'll believe. Until then, I'm going to assume it was always there. Okay.
Yeah.
We can't get rid of something because we don't like it. People, I think my audience has known for a while now that that's my view. I do not like hypothetical interpolations at all.
Sure.
As much as I don't like hypothetical documents that you can't prove exist. 1 Corinthians 3:15-16. If the work is burned up, the builder will suffer loss. The builder will be saved, but only as through fire. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? That is an argument that could only work after the temple was destroyed. What's being argued here is that we don't need a building for God. It is outdated. Your body, your mind is the temple. It's a spirit that dwells in you. You don't need a building. So 1 Corinthians lines up with 1 Thessalonians perfectly. The wrath has already come. And if you read ecclesiastical literature on this, the destruction of the temple is the wrath of God. Now, usually they'll usually connect it to the death of Jesus. Origen talks about it in relation to the destruction of James when he's quoting Josephus and also misremembering part of what Josephus had said about James's death and the relationship to the war, because Josephus never says that James's death was connected to the war. That's where Origen screws up. But Origen said it should be because of Jesus' death that the war happened, not James. He was a little upset by something he misremembered anyway. But he was also upset, probably I think more so because Josephus did not accept Jesus in the present tense as the Christ, because in the Greek, Josephus uses the word in, was, whereas Origen like, no, you should have used estin. That means is. You should have used estin. Jesu estin Christo. Jesus is Christ. Not was. So that kind of pissed him off. So again, back to the point that I was just making. 1 Thessalonians is clearly about the destruction of the temple. 1 Corinthians is a further elaboration on the subject by stating, don't rebuild it. We don't need it because it is within us. It is out of date.
Well, speaking of dates, we got Storytime Jesus. He says, can stylometry, if I pronounce that correctly. Stylometry. Date Paul's letters. Can stylometry date Paul's letters? No. Okay.
I'll be honest. I can't stand stylometry. I think it's ridiculous.
To be honest with you, please inform me. Stylometry.
Okay, so it's the idea of using computers to determine. And this can involve AI, by the way, to determine different strands of writing style. And I've had scholars tell me that this is pseudoscience being applied to the letters. That it's when it's applied to using letters, when it's applied to using text to determine layers, you can't know it because here's the problem. It's like, well, it's not human beings doing it; it's AI. I'm like, well, guess who programmed the feeble AI? Man did.
Yeah, man, right.
So the issue here is you still have to come in with a subjective bias to try to determine. I believe I can magically detect pieces of which letter was written by who, or I could come up with 50 proto-marks to determine layers. Like, you can't prove any of that. No, it's ridiculous to me. I know some people believe it, fine, but when I'm asked about it, I'm like, I'm going to be real here. I think it's ridiculous. I'm sorry. I think it's ridiculous. No, it's not a legitimate way of telling how, if there really is layering in a text. Besides, I kind of think it's ridiculous when they're applied to Paul's letters, when they're already telling you that the letters are co-authored in the first place. So we don't need to wonder about it. Like, what kind of game are we playing here? We don't need it. But some people are just gonna use it anyway, and like, all right, whatever, that's their choice. But no, stylometry dating Paul's letters. It's circular. It's clearly flawed. It's flawed, and you want to date the letters. You look at the text, like I'm doing. You look at what they talk about. Look at what they're talking about. Compare it to history to determine when they were written. That's what I'm doing here. Like 1 Thessalonians 2:13-16 refers to the destruction of the temple. 1 Corinthians 3:15-16 is discussing a post-temple world. They both are. So that's my point.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very good. Let's see here. We got, I want to get to everybody's questions. So you guys, if you have not asked a question, by all means, go ahead and do so now, and I will be sure to go ahead and present your question. And I've enjoyed this topic. I mean, it's been a while since I get to sit back and actually learn something, and I've learned a lot just from this, 40 minutes. It definitely inspires me, Jacob, to go ahead and dig deep, which leads me here to this Storytime Jesus's assertion here. It would be nice to see a round table of a lot of these issues. I enjoyed the debate between Carrier and McDonald. It would be nice to have a round table of even some of the scholars that you have presented, some of the authors that you presented on this. That would be nice. I think that this is, somewhat groundbreaking. And I believe you mentioned before that there's not a lot on this topic, and this is definitely something that I think is challenging and can, bring about a lot of clarity. Storytime Jesus then again states, for years, it was thought Paul's letters were not gathered at Clement's time. Nowadays, scholars point to Mark using most of Paul's letters. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, Mark using Paul's letters is not entirely a new thing, but that's been said for a while. You could say that it's spread in scholarship, sure. Saying that Paul's letters were not gathered at Clement's time is kind of odd, since he knows about a letter of Paul. But I'm supposed to believe that none of them were gathered before his time. Again, like I said, Clement is a double-edged sword for scholars, because once you admit that Clement knows a letter, you got to explain how he doesn't know the others. Or if he knew the others, why is he silent about them? Why does he contradict them too on top of that? These are the kind of issues that have not been properly dealt with at all, in my view, by the scholarship today.
It kind of reminds me of it's analogous. I know it's not similar, but it kind of reminds me of like in the book of Job, like how they date the book of Job. They go, well, why didn't Job bring up Abraham? Why didn't Job bring up Moses? And so they kind of date that, well, because he was actually before. And so Job is like the oldest one. And they're making like these inferences because of that silence. And I think that silence, the fact that Job is not mentioning these key essential figures, these key essential events, it speaks volumes. And that's why I want to make that comparison. I know it's analogous. I know it's not precisely the same, but that silence speaks volumes. And I think that you're bringing up a solid point. The fact that Clement is not silence on that silence speaks volumes. And, I think this is absolutely amazing. Let me go and present this next comment. I know it's not a question, but I think it's something that is very intriguing. Basically, the Church of Philippi fabricated Philippians for their own benefit. The Church of Corinth fabricated Corinthians for their own benefit, and so on. They existed independently. Any comments, any thoughts on that?
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the Epistle to Philippians, and I'm going to show, let me see if I can. Okay, good.
While you pull that up, here's more. Each church had.
I'm ready to share it.
Okay. It says each church had their own fabricated epistle of Paul until Marcion later on collected each one of them and combined them. Interesting.
So I mentioned Clement and Epaphroditus earlier there in Philippians, and when you look at here, I got it. You got Clement right there, and then in the same chapter, so Clement says that he's a fellow. So it says here, right? Clement's a fellow laborer. And then I go down a little bit. You have Epaphroditus in verse 18. This is in chapter 4. But I have all and abound, I'm full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you. So again, Clement is mentioned, and so is Epaphroditus. They're both here. Now, I remember I mentioned Caesar's household. Guess what? In the same chapter that those names occur, in verse 22, look at that. And all the saints salute you, chiefly they that are of Caesar's household. Look at that right there. Caesar's household, which is constantly downplayed by scholars.
Oh, yes.
Caesar's household. So Clement and Epaphroditus, the implication here is they're both connected to Caesar's household. They are. They are connected to that topic that we see here. They're connected to that subject. And so my point is, this helps to indicate that Titus Flavius Clemens is Clement, and then Josephus is Epaphroditus, aka Nero's freedman, is this Epaphroditus. They're talking about the same guy. And again, this doesn't make sense if we're talking about something that is much earlier in time. But there's another point that I want to make. This is very, very devastating to the standard view. And it's going to be in my paper. I'm going to find the reference real quick, and then I'm going to pull it up. Give me 1 second.
Sure. Again, you guys in the chat, I'm telling you, this is dynamite. I'm learning something. And those of you guys that are in the chat, by all means, ask your questions and take advantage of this present moment, because this is something that you're not going to really see in conservative seminaries. You're not going to see this in Bible colleges. You're not going to get a lot of this. And so to me, this is rare. And, it's like finding a diamond. And, I've spoken to Jacob about this earlier, just privately a couple weeks ago before this live stream. And this is absolutely intriguing. And so those of you guys in the chat, thank you so much for your attention. And by all means, you guys take advantage of this opportunity and ask Jacob your questions. Go ahead, Jacob. Sure.
Let me tell you why I don't believe that Galatians. I'll never believe Galatians is pre-war again because of this verse right here. This is from Life of Josephus 113. And this is so significant that I feel like I need to get it up on the screen.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is because I don't have it in the slides, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it.
Okay.
And there, it's ready to go.
Did you put it in the comment section or okay?
It's about to be up on the screen now.
Okay, perfect.
This is what Josephus says happened to adults, or can happen to adults, before the destruction of the second temple. And when the Jews would force them to be circumcised if they would stay among them, I would not permit them to have any force put upon them, but said to them, everyone ought to worship God according to his own inclinations, and not to be constrained by force, and that these men who had fled to us for protection ought not to be so treated as to repent of their coming hither. And when I had pacified the multitude, I provided for the men that were come to us whatsoever it was they wanted according to their usual way of living, and that in great plenty also. Now I want you to think about that, what's being discussed here. They were forcing adults to circumcise. Yeah. Think about that for a second. They were forcing people, full-grown people, to circumcise. That's how serious they took it. You're going to tell me that Galatians happened in pre-70 Jerusalem? Really? How did Paul not get killed for what the kind of things he said in Galatians? How did he not get at least forcefully circumcised? Or his followers? You see how strange that is? Look what kind of things Josephus says here. I'm supposed to believe Galatians is 470 CE. But if we turn it the other way, say Galatians is post-war, and the person calling himself Paul, the one I think is Saul of Giscala, is the one making these theological arguments, and he didn't feel like he was in danger doing so because the zealots have been pacified. That makes more sense. Galatians is post-war, and that's why the person calling himself Paul felt very safe arguing the points he was arguing. If we put it before the war, what Josephus says here has got to apply, and it doesn't. Why not?
Interesting.
Now people will just say, "Oh well, it's debated." I'm like, no. They didn't want to debate it. They wanted to force you to circumcise.
Yeah. Circumcision was debated pre-70. Josephus shows where Jews wanted to be, and to my understanding, Timothy was also circumcised as an adult as well. I mean, it was Paul who was, telling him to do that so that he wouldn't offend the Jews. That's something that would be more to that.
Yeah. He probably, if he did, it would have probably been during or before the war. Timothy was a very, very young person, because the Acts of Timothy, guess what the Acts of Timothy says? That Timothy was released when Emperor Nerva came to power. Do you know what that means? Timothy was released from prison in 96 CE. Or 97 CE. Really, it's more like 97, actually. 97 CE. That is 40 to 60 years, depending on how you look at the standard chronology, after the letters supposedly were written. What the hell is Timothy doing alive in the late 90s?
What was the life expectancy of people? Like, they would die around, what, 40, 50s is what I was saying, according to...
That's about right. Yeah. That's about right.
Yeah.
Now, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to find it so that way I can... I don't know if I have the slide for the Acts of Timothy, but I'm going to try to see if I do. So let me go get.
Sure. Again, you guys, go ahead and give your questions, you guys. Give your comments. I appreciate your guys' attention. Very interesting audience, you guys. If you're new to my channel, by all means, you could reach out to me if you would like to, have live discussions on these issues. You are obviously very passionate, very dedicated towards these topics. We have 72 people watching, and by all means, you guys, utilize my platform if you would like to let your voice be heard on these topics, because these topics are important. And I think that Jacob is bringing something that's absolutely groundbreaking. In all my years in Bible college and seminary, growing up in church, these topics do not get discussed. And even if, you're taking the critical scholarship worldview, these topics right here, these details, even the verses of scripture that Jacob has presented, it's these topics you're not going to hear on a pulpit. You're not going to really hear very much on, but they're extremely important.
I found it.
Perfect. And who knows how this is going to shape and develop as the decades go by. By all means, Jacob, proceed.
When Emperor Domitian's life came to an end, Nerva received imperial power and recalled the most divine apostle and evangelist John from exile. He returned and took up his seat in this radiant metropolis of the Ephesians. And when he discovered that the most holy Timothy had completed his life in the manner previously mentioned, he took up the place of honor on the apostolic throne. Through those who were found at the time to be chief priests, he endured and managed his office until the reign of Trajan. So that's from the 4th century Acts of Timothy saying this to you. So we have Timothy living in the 90s. I want people to really think about that. What the hell is he doing alive in the 90s? Being released under Emperor Nerva? Oh, and John is there too. What's he doing there? How about Hebrews 13? Y'all will love what Hebrews 13 says. It's small, so I'll just read it. It's really not worth putting it in the slide. Here. You should know that our brother Timothy has been released, with whom I shall see if he comes. That's Hebrews 13:23. It's talking about the same thing in the Acts of Timothy. Released from prison, because Timothy was in prison with Paul in Colossians, Philippians, and Philemon, the prison letters. He got released. Now, that doesn't make sense under Nero. That only happened after Domitian was killed in 96. It's literally the only time in the entire first century when Christians were supposedly released in mass like this. That's being kind. I don't think they were ever released like this at all in the entire first century until Nerva. There's no evidence for it. So again, what I'm trying to point out is you have a context in which you have verses in the epistles talking about release. Hell, even in Philippians, Paul said, the guy called pseudo Paul, I'll just call him that. Saul, I'm just gonna call it pseudo Paul. Saul, as I'll refer to him, simpler. He's saying, I expect to be released. No, wait. I thought you're about to be killed by Nero. What do you mean you think you're about to be released? What do you mean by that? Let's find that verse. Just take me a second.
Sure.
That's in Philippians 1:25-26. We'll just revise standard version. I've been going through different versions tonight, but whatever.
Sure.
Convinced of this, I know that I shall remain and continue with you all for your progress in joy in the faith, so that in me you may have ample cause of glory in Christ Jesus because of my coming to you again. Coming to you again. That's in the prison letter, Philippians, one of the prison letters. He is not fearful. I was like, I'm not going to die. Like, what do you mean you're not going to die? I thought you're about to be beheaded by Nero. What do you mean by that? No, he's quite confident he's going to live. So that takes me to my next point. Let me get rid of that. It's high time now that we deal with the story of Paul being killed by Nero. I'm going to show all of y'all where it came from. It comes from this right here. This is in Wars 2, 556 to 584, okay? So I'm going to read the whole thing. After this calamity had befallen Cestius, many of the most eminent of the Jews swam away from the city as from a ship when it was going to sink. You notice that metaphor right there? As from a ship when it was going to sink. He's employing a sinking ship metaphor. That's Josephus. Costoboros, and Saul, who were brethren together with Philip, the son of Jasmus, who was the commander of King Agrippa's forces, ran away from the city and went to Cestius. But then how Antipas, who had been besieged with them in the king's palace, but would not fly away with them, was afterwards slain by the seditious. We shall relate hereafter. However, Cestius sent Saul. In Greek, he's using Saulus, so I'm going to say Saulus. Cestius sent Saulus and his friends at their own desire to Achaia, to Nero. See that, Tristan? Saulus is going to see Nero. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
To inform him of the great distress they were in, and to lay the blame under kindling the war upon Florus, as hoping to alleviate his own danger by provoking his indignation against Florus. That's intense. He's going, Costoboros and his brother Saulus are going before Nero to blame everything on Governor Florus. Now, again, what's being suggested here is that's a dangerous task. That kind of dangerous task that they might not make it out alive doing if Nero isn't tamed by this argument. And clearly he was not, because guess what? Saulus and Costoboros never show up in Josephus again. They never get mentioned after the story. I'm not convinced of Robert Eisenman's argument that this is Paul. As I said, and I'm partly tired of repeating myself on this, but I've got to do it. The claim that this man, Saulus, is the biblical Paul is to project what the Bible says about Paul onto this guy. Nowhere does Josephus state that Saulus was a Christian, a believer in Jesus, wrote a bunch of letters that are like our canonical epistles of Paul. None of this. Anyone who says this is engaging in a conflation of what Josephus is saying with what the letters are saying. It's not the same person. This guy is not even the same person as Saul of Giscala that Jerome was talking about. That's still a different person. So that's 3 of them we're talking about here. 3.
Yeah.
So you got the first one, the real guy that died in 39. You got the second one that gets killed in 66 CE, because this story here is in 66 CE. And Nero has him and his brother Christoborus killed. And that's where Lucius Carinus, the person that wrote the Acts of Paul, got the idea from, that Paul was killed by Nero. He was plagiarizing the story.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And look at what happens in the next paragraph. In the meantime, the people of Damascus, when they were informed of the destruction of the Romans, said about the slaughter of those Jews that were among them, how like Paul's flight from Damascus in Acts, fleeing from Jews. Saul and Christoborus fleeing from Herodium, the king's palace, in the first paragraph. That takes me to another point. You see, in 2 Corinthians 11, you have this ridiculous story of Paul fleeing from King Aretas. He gets lowered from a basket. Well, there's a problem with that. King Aretas IV never controlled Damascus. In fact, Tristian, this is such a big problem that even standard scholars are trying to explain that. They admit it's a problem. Standard scholars don't know what to do about that. So, well, all we got to go on in 2 Corinthians, Josephus ever says Aretas controlled Damascus. Well, guess who controlled Damascus? King Aretas III in the 70s BCE, 100 years earlier in time.
Wow.
What is he doing? Time traveling? Back to the future? Or I should say back to the Paul. Or maybe back to the Christ, whatever. So this doesn't work. Okay? Acts, our Acts, canonical Acts, before the ridiculous Acts of Paul, in which Paul gets beheaded and somehow gets his head reattached and rises from the dead. It basically says that. He appeared alive again. Well, I don't know. His head got reattached, I guess. Ridiculous. And guess who shows up in that story? Cestus, a Roman centurion. Like Cestius, the commander. The same guy. So Acts is also plagiarizing Josephus to correct 2 Corinthians on an error. So, okay, so here's what I'm going to do. King Aretas IV never controlled Damascus, so I'm going to claim that Paul fled from Jews by plagiarizing a guy with a similar name to him from Josephus right there. So Acts plagiarizes Josephus to correct an error by 2 Corinthians. That's why he flees from Jews in Acts, and Aretas never shows up there. Because the author of Acts knew that this was wrong. Now, some apologists will try to say it's, no, he did both. No, come on, that's ridiculous. So you're going to tell me that Paul was lowered from a basket 2 times, 30 years apart? Seriously? You're going to tell me that with a straight face? So no, Acts is doing that to correct the blunder of 2 Corinthians. Here's the problem. If you admit 2 Corinthians is wrong about King Aretas controlling Damascus, well, that probably means Paul didn't write 2 Corinthians. Can't have that. We got to make it right. No. 2 Corinthians was wrong, and there's no getting around it. And Acts had to plagiarize and conflate him with another person to correct it, as I've just shown. The martyrdom under Nero is not real. It's a lie. It is a conflation of a different man from Josephus.
Wow.
It did not actually happen to Paul. It is an absolute fabrication in the mid-late 2nd century. Okay? There's just no getting around it. Let's see here. And again, how does he die? How does the real Paul die? Let's read this whole thing. There was Peter, who by the reason of unrighteous jealousy endured not one, but many labors, and thus having borne his testimony, went to his appointed place of glory. By reason of jealousy and strife, Paul, by his example, pointed out the prize of patient endurance. After that, he had been 7 times in bonds. 7 imprisonments? That's a bit more than the New Testament talks about. Where did that come from? He didn't get that from our letters. Had been driven into exile, had been stoned, had preached in the east and in the west. He won the noble renown, which was the reward of his faith, having taught righteousness unto the whole world, having reached the farthest bounds of the west. And when he had borne his testimony before the rulers, so he departed from the world, went to the holy place, having been found a notable pattern of endurance, of patient endurance. Now let's talk about that for a second. Let's just think about that. There's 2 Christian scholars, okay? Oscar Coleman and David L. Eastman. And guess what they say? Paul was killed by believers. You know why they say that, Tristian? Because of what I just read right there. Peter and Paul were the subjects of unrighteous jealousy and envy. That is a totally different death than the fictive story of his death at the hands of Nero that we're told in the 2nd century. Envious men killed him, not Romans. And he was killed in the furthest west of the empire. That's Hispania. In Romans 15, we're told that Paul plans to go to Hispania, not that he made it. According to Clement, he did make it there. And that's where he was killed. Now, some will argue that 1 Clement, how do I know it's authentic? Here's the thing. Who in their right mind in the 2nd century would fabricate something like this? A letter that is so ignorant of the New Testament, contradicts the New Testament. You know what else 1 Clement doesn't talk about, Tristian? This will blow your mind. Paul's vision. Clement doesn't know about Paul's vision. Never talks about it. How could you leave something like that out? Paul's vision, his famous vision of Jesus' spiritual appearance to him, that's not there. Not a hint of it.
Wow.
There's a New Testament scholar who does not agree with what I'm saying. He's a Pauline scholar named Frank Hughes. He wrote a book with the late Bob Jewett, and it's a very good book on the Corinthian correspondence. It's a very interesting book. Frank wonders why Clement doesn't talk about 2 Corinthians. There's no hint that Clement knew 2 Corinthians. It's very strange because I believe he told me that Clement, if I remember what he said to me correctly, that Clement should have used it. It would have helped his arguments. He doesn't do it. No hint of his knowledge of 2 Corinthians.
Wow. These are great points. And you know what? I wish that we had some, evangelical scholars here to, give some pushbacks and you can come back and, correct them and, change their viewpoints, because this is like bomb dropping. We have somebody here in the chat. I thought this was an interesting question. How does N.T. Wright, like, for example, if you were to be talking to N.T. Wright, I wonder what he would say in response to this. How does N.T. Wright account for the Pauline corpus following the 4 canonical gospels? Does he state that Paul was written in C90? Now, this may be, not trying to deviate what you were just stating. Did
I'm
you just
still
go
here. My camera turned itself off for some stupid reason.
My camera does the same thing,
I don't know why. It's so
I try to do some research on that too, and I guess it just does it.
You let me know when you find the answer on that. There we go.
Yeah, I will. That's something I got to research. Yeah. So how does N.T. Wright account for the? And I'm not trying to deviate from what you were stating, but I do want to honor those who have asked the questions in the comment section. But if you want to give just a brief synopsis on this, how does N.T. Wright account for the Pauline corpus following the 4 canonical gospels? Does he state that Paul was written?
No, he does not say that. N.T. Wright has a very standard view of the dating of the text. He goes with the standard view. And he's a believer. He's a Christian. if I remember correctly. So, yeah, it's he follows a very conservative like view of the dating of these texts. So no, he would absolutely oppose what I'm saying. He would not agree with anything that I'm saying.
Oh yeah. I mean, rightfully so, because if he did agree with what you were saying, he'd probably lose a massive following. It's
To say the
amazing.
least.
Yeah, to say the least, exactly. And it's very unfortunate, especially those in the evangelical world or those who in the conservative view of the datings, because I think that a lot of Christian adherents, when we get involved in the datings, they want to downplay those datings, and the datings mean a lot, especially if you're taking an honest, logical approach to this. But by all means, go ahead and proceed to the rest of the points. I don't see any other questions in the chats. I'm looking through them, and I just see a lot of back and forth in the comment section.
Sure.
But by all means, go ahead and proceed. And those of you guys that are in the chat, it's been over an hour, so please, by all means, if you have any questions, any inputs that you would like to ask Jacob, or any comments to help shape and develop this discussion, by all means, go ahead and do so now. But by all means, have your liberty, Jacob, and proceed.
Again, like I was saying earlier, a lot of followers, there are followers of Eisenman that follow my work, and I can tell that on one hand they like what I'm saying, they don't like it in another because they're so desperate for Paul to be a Herodian. I used to be like that. Okay, I changed my mind. People change their minds. Okay, it just happens. Now, here's the thing. The canonical text does try to portray Paul as a Herodian. This is true. Romans 16 does say Paul is a Herodian. But you know why? Because they were plagiarizing Saulus from Josephus, who was a Herodian. I just read from that. Elsewhere, Josephus states that Saulus was a kinsman of Herod Agrippa. Yes, the Saulus that was killed by Nero was a Herodian. So that's where the idea that Paul is a Herodian comes from. And as I pointed out in a 3-hour video stream that I did with Derek and Neil recently, I said, listen, anyone that says that the Paul of the letters is exactly the same person, perfectly the same person as the one Josephus is talking about, you have to conflate. You have to embellish what Josephus says. I hate to say this, but anyone that does that is guilty of the same thing that the con man Lucius Carinus in the late 2nd century did. He plagiarized Josephus and he pretended that Paul was Saulus. It's the same thing. He read Paul into Josephus. He tried to make it look like Paul was killed by Nero when he knew it was a different person. It's not the same guy. Lucius Carinus is a liar. Even the church thought he was a con man. That's how bad it was. Now, why they preserved that Paul was killed by Nero is beyond me. But my point is, it's ridiculous. It really is. You have to conflate what Josephus is saying. You have to pretend Josephus is talking about Paul when Josephus never claims that. He never says that Saulus and his brother Costobarus were Christians. He never says this. In order for me to believe this, I have to believe that Josephus is hiding it. Well, why would he hide it? He calls Saulus a wicked man, by the way. I didn't show that. He does. He called him a wicked man. Why would he hide that? So the epistles hide that it's a guy in Josephus, while Josephus hides that he's the guy in the letters at the same time. That's not very convincing. And then Clement doesn't know all about that somehow. You see the problem there?
Yeah.
So Clement is ignorant of all of that, while Josephus is hiding it, and Acts is also hiding it in different ways. No, that's a lot for me to swallow. I can't go along with that. In fact, if I had realized how ridiculous that sounded, I would have not believed that stuff even sooner. No, it doesn't work.
Wow. I'm telling you, Jacob, to me personally, this is groundbreaking stuff. I mean, this is great. I mean, you're getting into a field of scholasticism, of biblical literature that many have not ventured. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to be, listening to this again. And those of you guys that are in the comment section, I would encourage you, especially those of you guys who, who've been on my channel and maybe you've not known who Jacob Ehrman is. He's definitely somebody who is bringing something that is extremely important in biblical scholasticism. And this is groundbreaking, in my opinion, Jacob. And I'm excited to see how this is going to shape and develop in the years to come. I mean, this is definitely eye-opening, and I think that more and more people, even if you're a Christian and you want to shape in your apologetic, you want to defend your faith, you're going to have to listen to this, because this is extra biblical literature, and at the end of the day, this is something that needs to be taken seriously. We do have somebody here. He says, "How do we know that Clement here is authentic?" Seems to be maybe something that's a little pushback. Like, we're referencing Clement, we're referencing Josephus. What do we say to those who say, well, how do we even know that that's authentic? You know what I mean? I'm not trying to be like a hyper skeptic, right? Like, how do we even know that all this stuff is real? How do we know all this stuff is fabricated? What do you say in response to this question, Jacob?
Why would somebody, as I said earlier, why would somebody in the 2nd century write a letter in Clement's name that is ignorant of almost the entire content of the New Testament, and then the parts of it that does have quasi-parallels to the New Testament also contradict it? That's simple. You have a small letter that, on the one hand, proves that there was a historical Paul, but on the other hand, massively contradicts the New Testament, as I've shown the evidence of earlier. And I don't buy that that 1 Clement is somehow evidence of apostolic succession. You know what? If 1 Clement's a forgery, I got a riddle that people claiming that view will not be able to answer. Then why does it not say that it was offered by Bishop Clement of Rome? Yes, that's right. Did it ever occur to you that the letter never called him bishop, even though it's written by him? Riddle that for me. Seriously, it never says it never says he's a bishop. It's weird. Why would you write that and then forget I'm Bishop of Rome?
Right.
He just had, I don't know, he just forgot totally one night. Right. I'm not a bishop. Come on.
And you would think if he was the bishop, he would assert that to establish his authority by what he's writing and the assertions that he's writing. Very good point, by the way.
Thank you. Let me read the beginning of the letter. The church of God, which sojourneth in Rome, to the church of God, which sojourneth in Corinth, to them which are called and sanctified by the will of God, through our Lord Jesus Christ. Grace to you and peace from Almighty God, through Jesus Christ, be multiplied. Yeah, he doesn't say nothing about being bishop anywhere in that statement. Never does throughout the entire letter. Wow. So, if this is a fabrication and forgery in the 2nd century, after the ideas about Clement have developed, then why would they leave that out? That doesn't make any sense. Why would Clement refer to 1 Corinthians in the most vague way possible? Okay. And not mention Sophanes for co-author. And then 1 Corinthians, by the way, mentions Paul's vision in a less detailed way than 2 Corinthians does. But why did Clement skip over that and not talk about it? Oh, Paul got a vision too. No, he doesn't. So if he had 1 Corinthians, why would he leave that out? What he had was another letter that we don't have that has some parallels with 1 Corinthians. That's what he's got. We don't got it. It's probably a very small letter, and we just don't have it. He doesn't even really quote it. He describes some of its content. He just described it. He doesn't really quote it. We just don't got it. We don't have it. This one letter by the real man, the real Paul, we just don't got it. We can barely get a glimpse of it, thanks to Clement of Rome, or we would know nothing of it. That's it.
Wow.
By the way, one more thing I'll say is Clement not calling himself bishop lines up with Philippians not calling Clement bishop either. Just going to throw that out there.
Wow. Here's a comment that I saw, kind of controversial, pretty interesting. It says, horrible Herod violated the Virgin Mary after Joseph was unable to pay his taxes. He left Mary for dead, yet he lived and was pregnant with the king's baby. All else is a lie. I just thought this was funny. I'm not sure who this person is, but any comments on this statement?
The idea that Jesus is this guy believes Jesus is the son of Herod the Great, by the way. That's what is going on here.
That's what's going on here. Okay.
No
Interesting.
offense, Viking. It is ridiculous, and I don't have much more to say on it. I think it is an absolutely ridiculous theory that Jesus is Herod's son, and I just don't want to waste my time with it.
I've been learning a lot today. I got to tell you, I've been learning a lot. I've never even heard of that before ever in my life. And I think it's from the same person. Mary was God's granddaughter. Okay, I mean, I thought I've heard it all, but I've been proven wrong today. Those of you guys, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You go ahead. You finish.
No. By all means, go ahead.
So the other thing. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate it. Appreciate the super chat. Let's see. I'm going to show everybody something here.
We also
thank you for the super chat.
Yeah, we have a paid super chat and a question. And those of you guys, it's been over an hour. By all means, if you have anything to say, if you have any questions, now is the time. But I do want to get to the super chat question, but by all means, Jacob, proceed.
What the Ebionite books versus Paul conflict in the New Testament? Well, we don't really I mean, so what we got is we have the gospel of the Ebionites, which church fathers talk about. It's a massive mess. I've changed my mind before about the Hebrew gospel because it's a very messy subject. So I think the Hebrew gospel, I've recently become convinced of Dr. Samuel Zinner's position. I think his position is that what we call Hebrew Matthew and Papias was actually composed by the same man that wrote Greek Matthew. But both Matthews post-date Mark. So when you look at Papias, okay, in fact, I believe I can probably show this if you just give me a second to get to it. Okay, pull it up. It's ready. So notice that what Papias says here, wherefore Mark made no mistakes and thus writing things as he remembered them. And then he states, Matthew put together the oracles of the Lord in the Hebrew language, and each one interpreted them as best as he could. Now I'm going to read what was stated in between. This is Papias' description of Mark. For of one thing, he took a special care not to omit anything he had heard and not to put anything fictitious into his statements. So Papias is kind of describing Mark as kind of in a chaotic, kind of being a little bit chaotic, out of order. Whereas Matthew is he places Matthew after Mark. So what's fascinating about Papias is he's our oldest reference to Mark's gospel that we've got. And guess what, Tristan? He puts it before Matthew, just like we do today. Papias believed in Mark in priority. That's right. So Papias is believing in Mark in priority. And so what's happening here is he's putting Mark before Matthew. The Hebrew Matthew he talks about is after Mark. It's correcting Mark. And it's written in the Hebrew language first, and then we get it in Greek. So it's basically two different, Hebrew Matthew and Greek Matthew are two different takes of the same gospel by Matthew the evangelist in the early 2nd century. By the way, while I'm on that subject, the church father Dorotheus of Tyre, who most people have never heard of, in the so-called works of pseudo Dorotheus of Tyre, guess when he puts Mark? He had Mark dying under Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century.
Oh, wow.
Mark the evangelist dies in the early 2nd century, according to Dorotheus.
Wow.
But this is not talked about. So, yes, there is evidence in ecclesiastical literature that there was a belief that the Gospels are later in time, much later in time, and the Standard View places them. Yeah. You have to dig through it, but it's there.
Yeah.
It's there. But to address more Backen's question, I think that the historical Paul's plot was clearly to kill James, brother of Jesus, as the pseudo-Clementine recognitions talks about. And I have to show that to properly adjust your super chat, even though I know you asked about that in a non-super chat. The slides I'm going to show here, okay. I've had to go through different PowerPoints tonight. I was saved on my computer. Okay. There was a second Clement of Rome. That's right. If we look at the Shepherd of Hermas as a 2nd century text, it says, "Those shall therefore write 2 little books, and shall send one to Clement, and one to Grapte. So Clement shall send to the foreign cities, for this is his duty. While Grapte shall instruct the widows and the orphans, but those shall read the book to this city, along with the elders have preside over the church." Why is this important? Because it establishes that there's another Clement that is alive in the mid-2nd century. Why? Because in the Moratorian fragment, guess who Hermas is the brother of? Bishop Pius of Rome. Yes, in the 140 CE, that same Pius of Rome who excommunicated Marcion, the famous heretic, so-called heretic that was excommunicated from the church in 144 CE, Tristian. So Hermas is this dude's brother. And Clement is sending to foreign cities, kind of like the traveling Clement you see in the recognitions. So this is another Clement in the 2nd century. So what's gone unnoticed is that the so-called pseudo-Clementine literature was really just written by a different Clement. There's a different guy. And initially, he doesn't even claim to be the one that lived earlier. We don't get that until I think it's called the letter of Peter, the Clement's letter to James or something like that. It's there, and he begins to identify himself as bishop when he did not do so before. But beforehand, he didn't claim that at all. In Origen's Philokalia, it says, "And Clement of Rome, in his argument with his father at Laodicea, has some comments on the question before us. The passage occurs in the Travels, which agree with the following. Towards the end, he speaks with great force on the seeming results of Nativity, Book 10. In the recognitions, you go to Book 10, it's about the Nativity of Greco-Roman gods, Tristan. So yes, the Philokalia does know, or the Philokalia clearly shows the origin of Alexandria in the 1st century CE, knew the recognitions in all of its fullest glory in 10 books. And Eusebius' church history, he refers to it in another way. As being containing dialogues of Peter and Appian, but no mention has been made of these by the ancients. He also talks about 2nd Clement. He seems to link it with them too. I believe that this very Clement in the mid-2nd century is the same one that wrote 2nd Clement. And even the church knew that 2nd Clement wasn't written by the same person that wrote 1st Clement, by the way. That's what Eusebius is talking about here. I'll just point out something else that's interesting here. If you compare Papias and 2nd Clement's recognitions, look at the names here. It mentions them in a very similar order, practically the same order. Matthew, Andrew, John, Peter, Thomas, James, Philip. Actually, I don't remember if it's the same order, so I'll be a little careful there. But they do mention both of them. Papias talked about a series of people that wrote a bunch of logia, which is sayings in Greek. And recognitions, Matthew, Andrew, John, Peter, Thomas, James, and Philip all say things. They're speaking, they're saying things. And Papias is referring to them as saying things. So it feels like to me the recognitions appears to be making use of Papias and also responding to Papias. There's only one problem, Tristan. We lost almost everything Papias ever wrote. We don't have much of his writing. So I don't know in what way the recognitions is responding polemically to Papias because we don't have Papias's writings. We have 2nd Clement's full text. We have everything he wrote, or at least most of what he wrote. We don't have that for Papias. So I'm unable to provide a full analysis at this time on this. I can't do it. It's not possible right now. But what I'll do, so I'm going to show something else instead. I'm going to get that off the screen. And I have to shift to a different PowerPoint. And this will be the best way I can respond to the super chat, because I know it's long-winded. All right, here we are. If you could take the super chat off the screen, because it's blocking part of the words.
Sure, absolutely.
But all right, thanks. So,
of course.
Well, I'm not going to read all of this, but what I'm going to show is the top. These sayings of Gamaliel did not please much Caiaphas. So the reason why I'm just reading the top here is to establish that this is in book 1 of the recognitions, or what we want to read is in book 1, chapter 70. I want to establish to the audience that Caiaphas and Gamaliel are still alive. Okay, they're both in power in their respective positions. Because this is important to know, because what's going to happen in book 1, chapter 70. And that's Saul's attack on James. This is what I referred to earlier. Tumult raised by Saul. That's how the text starts, right? So it's basically, that's what it's talking about. In the actual text, Saul, as the attacker, was removed. This was recovered in a margin note by a copyist. By the way, we have manuscript evidence of this. They tried to remove Saul from the text. Now that out of the way, let's read. And when matters were at that point that they should come and be baptized, some of our enemies entering the temple with a few men began to cry out and to say, "What mean ye, O men of Israel? Why are you so easily hurried on? Why are you led headlong by most miserable men who are deceived by Simon the magician?" While he was thus speaking and adding more to the same effect, that while James the bishop was refuting him, he began to excite the people and to raise a tumult, so that the people might not be able to hear what was said. Therefore, he began to drive all into confusion with shouting, and to undo what had been arranged with much labor. At the same time, to reproach the priests and to engage them with rivalings and abuse. And like a madman, to excite everyone to murder, saying, "What are you doing? Why do you hesitate? Oh, sluggish and inert, why do we not lay hands upon them and pull all these fellows to pieces?" When he had said this, he first, seizing a strong brand from the altar, set the example of smiting, then others also seeing him, were carried away with like readiness. Then ensued a tumult on either side of the beating, and the beaten much blood is shed. There is a confused flight, in the midst of which that enemy attacked James, and threw him headlong from the top of the steps. Supposing him to be dead, he cared not to inflict further violence upon him. All right, let's talk about why this is such a massive problem. As I just proved a moment ago, this narrative is set during the time of Gamaliel and Caiaphas. The only time that those two are in power simultaneously, Caiaphas is high priest and Gamaliel was Nasi of the Sanhedrin. It was from the year 30 to 36 CE, from the years 30 to 36 CE. That means this attack had to happen during that time, during that allotted amount of time, okay? And it appears to be 36 CE. That's when I think it happened. In fact, I know that's when it happened because the narrative talks about the Gerizim incident, the Samaritan incident at Mount Gerizim, when they were slaughtered in Josephus's text. The attack on James happened after that. Let's see here. I'm going to now show paragraph 70, chapter 72, which confirms how Second Clement heard of this story. See that right there? Saying that Zacchaeus. Look at that. Zacchaeus is writing letters. See my mouse?
Yeah.
Zacchaeus had written to him from Caesarea. This is the guy that the recognitions. Yes, it's post New Testament. It's mid-2nd century. Okay, I admit all of that. But you have to understand that Second Clement is using epistles that are lost. He is getting his information from first century letters, from the 30s, from 36E, talking about the attack. And what he's doing is he's taking what actually happened in history and he's putting it into a novel. He's novelizing it. He's turning it into a Greco-Roman fictive travel log. You get what I'm trying to say? So he's creating historical fiction by incorporating real events from letters. He's kind of telling you, okay, here's when I use letters, which he doesn't tell you very much in his recognitions. He's like, yeah, sometimes he'll tell you he's getting it from letters. And almost all of those 10 books, he doesn't tell you that. That means he's not actually using the epistles that often. But this is one of those cases that he does. And he's getting it from the letter of Zacchaeus. Now, Robert Eisenman knows that this is a problem. Now, for some reason, in James the Brother of Jesus, he incorrectly states that the recognitions place the attack, excuse me, in the 40 CE. It's actually the 30 CE. I don't know why he made that mistake. I criticize this in my paper as well. So here's how Eisenman dances around this problem. Oh, well, James survived the attack. Then he becomes the James and Josephus. You know, the James passage, Tristian, James, the brother Jesus called the Christ. He became that man. And then he actually gets killed. Well, hold on, Eisenman. You want me to believe a very similar attack happened twice, 30 years apart, 20, 30 years apart? Just like, it's like believing Paul escaped Damascus 2 times under a basket, which Eisenman himself thinks is silly. Well, if that's silly, why is this not silly, with all due respect? It's like me believing a Christian apologist when they say that Judas died in Matthew, he hung himself, then he exploded in Acts while he was hanging himself. So then we have to ask ourselves a different question. What do we do about Josephus then? He talks about James' brother Jesus, so he says. But we have sources that claim that James was killed in the 30s. Let me prove that claim real quick. Let me show evidence that actually is the case before I continue, because I'm moving too fast. This is Doratius Attire right here. And here's what he says. And as Abdias Ridif by Saul afterwards called Paul, thrown down and having breath after his fall, one came with a fuller's club, knocked him upon the head, and brained him. This is about James, the son of Alphaeus. He says that in the previous sentence. And by the apostles' place, Bishop of Jerusalem, he was by the Jews set upon a pinnacle of the temple, and as Abdias writeth, by Saul afterwards called Paul, thrown down and beaten, and having breath after his fall, one came with a fuller's club, knocked him upon the head, and brained him. So that means he was hit so hard his brains came out of his skull. So he's dead. He's a dead man. Right there. It's very clear. Now, Eisenman loves to bring up another point. And this takes me to the attack on Stephen. Let me see if I can pull that up. Give me a second, please. Okay, I gotta fix the way it's spaced out. And it's being slow right now. I'm not sure why. Almost there. I'm about to make a very critical point to my argument that will also be in my paper.
On this paper, are you publishing this paper?
Yeah, in Bob Price's Journal of Higher Criticism.
Ah, nice.
Now, here it is. All right. Ehrman claims that the Stephen character in Acts is based on James. I believe he's correct, but not for the reason he thinks. I want everybody to really pay attention to what I'm saying, and you'll see the problem. Remember that the person in question is identified as Saul or Paul as the attacker of James. So he's Saul. Actually, he's identified explicitly as Saul in the recognitions, and also by Abdias. Although Dortius thinks of it as Saul becoming Paul, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Regardless of how Abdias puts it, he does start out the reference as Saul. Okay, that's what's important. When the council members heard Stephen's speech, they were angry and furious, but Stephen was filled with the Holy Spirit. He looked toward heaven, where he saw our glorious God, Jesus, standing at his right side. Then Stephen said, I have seen heaven, I see heaven open, and the Son of Man standing at the right side of God. The council members shouted and covered their ears, and at once they all attacked Stephen and dragged him out of the city. Then they started throwing stones at him. The men who had brought charges against him put their coats at the feet of a young man named Saul. As Stephen was being stoned to death, he called out, Lord Jesus, please welcome me. He knelt down and shouted, Lord, don't blame them for what they have done. Then he died. Saul approved the stoning of Stephen. Some faithful followers of the Lord buried Stephen and mourned very much for him. At the time, the church in Jerusalem suffered terribly. All the Lord's followers, except the apostles, were scattered everywhere in Judea and Samaria. You see how that's very much like the attack on James? It's different. It's taking the stoning. It's ironically appears to be using Josephus here. Maybe even taking the stoning of James and Josephus and conflating it with how the earlier guy was killed. Nonetheless, my point is still made. Stephen died, Tristian. He didn't survive and die decades later. So if Stephen is about the James of the recognitions, you see my point? Or I should really say the James of Zacchaeus' letter that the recognitions is quoting. That's a mouthful, but that's more accurate. Stephen doesn't survive. Now, Zacchaeus didn't talk about the detail as far as we know. Abdias of Babylon is the one that finished the story. Remember? The Fuller's Club. So he is killed in near immediacy after he initially survived. Just like what happened to poor Stephen here. And note that all of Jerusalem is mourning of his death, just like what happened to James, right? So, Acts needs two sources to get us the story about Stephen. It needs Zacchaeus' letter, and it needs Abdias of Babylon. You combine the text together that fit very well. One complements the other. You get the death of Stephen. If this is about the James and Josephus, this doesn't make any sense. You're telling me that Acts it's trying to cover up that he was killed 30 years apart? Well, that's kind of odd. Because if I look at the recognitions and Abdias, if I look at Zacchaeus' letter in the recognitions, I look at Abdias of Babylon, it fits Acts 7 very nicely. Acts 7 to the first two verses of Acts 8. So this makes sense. But it doesn't work if you think it's the same James. If you read the beginning of the first apocalypse of James and the second apocalypse of James, back and thank you for your super chat. What factors as expulsion of sacerdotal priesthood from temple play from 30 simple fall who's killed in 62? Josephus says that death started war. Okay.
I wasn't trying to deviate, but
No. I just
wanted to put it up.
That's not why you'll see why I did that. Okay. I realize I'm forever going to have to repeat this point. Back in. I'm going to say this slowly. Very slowly, okay? Josephus never says James caused the war. Josephus never says James's death caused the war. Okay? Origen made a mistake. He thought Josephus said that. He did not. Okay? Go read the James passage again. Never says that the death caused the war. And you know what else Josephus never says? He never says that Saul attacked James either. It's not the same situation. Let's talk about, let me make a point. Tristian, It is not until the 3rd century that Christians believe that the James and Josephus was our James. Did you know that? We have no references at all to that guy in Josephus being our James until the 3rd century.
Wow.
Now, who was responsible for that? Origen of Alexandria. He's the first church father to talk about that passage and claim that that's the same person.
Wow.
As I've shown earlier, Origen knew about the recognitions in its fullest glory. Remember I showed that in the Philokalia? He knew book 10, which is the amount of books that are there, 10 books. So, Origen had an incentive to claim this, Tristian, because he didn't want Saul to be responsible for James's death. So what he did was he took advantage of a situation that Josephus mentioned a different James that happened to be referred to as Jesus' brother, and just simply said, that's it, he's our guy. What do you accomplish by making that claim? What did Origen accomplish by making that claim, Tristian? Ananus takes the full blame for James's death. And therefore, Saul is vindicated. You see my point? By claiming that it's the same James, you have removed Saul's involvement from the situation. And you have wiped the slate clean of the 30s. You have bleached it off the map. You have bleached the carpet. You've destroyed the evidence that the James in the 30s was attacked by Saul. In fact, you've erased him. Now everybody is focused on the guy in Josephus. So now, let's talk about the guy in Josephus. Let's talk about that. What? Because I know what's going to happen. I'm going to be asked, what evidence do I have that despite Josephus's claim that James really isn't Jesus' brother, despite what he said? That's a very fair question that needs to be answered, and I'm happy to oblige. Let's go over the evidence. I'm ready to pull it up. We'll start with the first apocalypse of James. It is the Lord who spoke with me. See now the completion of my redemption. I have given you a sign of these things, James, my brother, for not without reason have I called you my brother, although you are not my brother materially, and I am not ignorant concerning you, so that when I give you a sign, know and hear. Do you notice what it said there? You're not my brother materially. Now, where did this text get that information from? I can show you. This will be in my paper as well. It says, but you are to reveal them to Adai. When you depart immediately, war will be made with this land. Weep then for him who dwells in Jerusalem. But let Adai take these things to heart. In the 10th year, let Adai sit down and write them down. And when he writes them down, all right, so here's how I interpret this passage. 10 years after the war happened, after the temple was destroyed, gets you to the year 80. Or maybe if you put it 10 years after the war actually started in the year 66, you would get 76 instead. Not much of a difference. Who cares? Because you're still right between when Josephus wrote Wars and Antiquities. Why is that important? Why is it important that this guy wrote about James, but not brother of Jesus, between the books of Josephus, between Wars and Antiquities? You know why? Because Adai is the one relaying the information that James, the not brother of Jesus, was killed by stoning. Yes, he's killed by stoning. Let me prove it real quick. We got to go to the second apocalypse of James, which reiterates the point of the first one. Let me zoom in so that way y'all can read it. Let me get it shared. It's ready for you, Tristian. Pull it up. This is the discourse that James had just spoke in Jerusalem, which Miriam, one of the priests, wrote. He had told it to Theuda, the father of the just one, since he was a relative of his. Look at his name. It's Theuda. Yeah. Hey, Joseph. That doesn't sound nothing like Joseph, doesn't it? Again, it's following what the first text is saying, and now it's identifying who the father of this particular James is. Notice he's in Jerusalem. You notice that? He's in Jerusalem. He's father of the just one, James the just, right? And look at what we have here. Come, let us stone the just one. You see that? You see that, Tristian? The not brother of Jesus was stoned. It's the same guy that Josephus is talking about. Isn't that amazing? The not brother of Jesus is the one that was killed by stoning. This is all in the paper. Even the New Testament scholar John Painter noticed the similarity, that the apocalypses of James is describing the same death that Josephus is talking about. I cite him in my paper. It's very important information because it shows you that second century Christians or Gnostics, okay, Gnostics wrote the apocalypses of James, granted, but still, it shows you that these people did not believe that the James and Josephus was the brother of Jesus. And you wonder why it takes until the 3rd century for people to for people to recognize that the James and Josephus is the James of the New Testament, because it was believed that it wasn't him. And I've just shown evidence of that. You got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's groundbreaking. What can I say? Like, everything that you're presenting, I'm learning. And I can tell that even though there's not so much critical scholarship on this, what you're doing is absolutely groundbreaking, and it's eye-opening, and it's inspiring me to delve deeper into this. And I'm very interested to see how this is going to shape and develop for the decades to come. I mean, what can I say? I mean, I'm soaking this up as a sponge, and I think that those in the comment section are doing so as well. I'm looking at the comments, and I'm seeing that, I mean, there's really not much to say other than, there's nothing that I could challenge. There's nothing I don't think that even evangelical Christians can challenge, conservative scholars can challenge. I think that, I think this is absolutely phenomenal. And, what can I say? I mean, I've learned a lot.
So, to come to the conclusion of what I'm talking about, again, you have a lot of whataboutism going on. You have to, like, oh, well, what about the guy in Josephus? So this guy has to be Paul. It has to be him. Like, I keep making this point to no avail, that so if Eisenman apologists, I don't like to call them that, but they kind of are, okay, just to be fair. Listen, the James in Josephus just isn't the guy that was killed in 36. It's not the same guy. This is a different person. I'm sorry. It's a different guy. The manner of death is totally different. He was attacked. He was thrown down. Then he was brained with a fuller's club. It's not hard. And it's not rocket science. And I think it explains better why Josephus said, he used the Greek word legomeno, so-called. James, the brother of the so-called Jesus, the so-called Christ, or called the Christ. Maybe he wrote it in that strange way because of what I was talking about earlier. It's not James. It's not the real brother of Jesus. It's not. I want people to follow what I'm saying very carefully. If you imagine that the Paul in the letters is the guy in Josephus, Solus, you have to, in your mind, you have to fill that narrative up with details from the New Testament that Josephus never corroborated. Does that make sense, Tristian? You have to conflate these things that you cannot confirm. I can show text for my position without engaging in conflation like that. As you've noticed throughout the night, Tristian. I don't have to do that. They do. They have to conflate this person in Josephus with Paul. When I used to think like this, because I was there, okay? I don't deny it. I was there at one time. But I didn't realize how ridiculous this sounded. It's like, whoa, Romans 16, Paul's a Herodian. Josephus, Solus is a Herodian. Same guy. There is a connection, yes, but it's not what I thought. They're not literally the same person. The letters are using Josephus. They are integrating details of our people. That's what mythological texts do. That's what legendary texts do. They mix details. That's what they do. You can't take what these letters are saying and graft them onto a character that Josephus talks about. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way. That's why, for instance, when you read 1 Clement, Paul's death, as I've shown tonight, totally conflicts with how he's killed in the Acts of Paul. And I've shown that the Acts of Paul plagiarized Josephus to get Paul's martyrdom under Nero from a different guy. And his name just happened to be Saulus. So again, the other thing you have to do is this is another problem. It's like I feel like it just goes into one ear out the other. When I say, but my position is I'm skeptical that those 7 letters are by Paul. I don't think that they are. Yeah, but I keep hearing, but we know from the 7 letters of Paul, prove to me that Paul wrote those 7 letters. You keep presupposing, prove it to me that the 7 letters was by Paul. Prove it to me. Does Clement know about them? He doesn't. He doesn't know about them. He, in fact, contradicts them. I'm not denying that there was a historical Paul. I think he was real. But the letters are remaking him. The letters are importing a theological scenario from the 90s backwards. They're retrojecting theological arguments from the end of the 1st century back into the 30 CE when the original Paul had lived. That's what I keep trying to say. That's why I pointed out that we have different deaths for Paul. That's very important to my argument to show that they are conflating different people. I see Exy Music in the chat saying, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tristian.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Better yet, show evidence those churches existing in the 50 CE. Oh, that's savage. I mean, it's a good point there because we really have none. I mean, honestly, we have none. We don't even have any proof. There's no archaeological evidence for churches in the mid-1st century. We got nothing. I don't think we have anything for the entire 1st century, which is pretty bad. There are supposedly churches everywhere in the Mediterranean, all over the empire, and we don't have anything. Nothing. No archaeological evidence for it. It's awful. Maybe they'll find something in the future. Who knows? Even if they do, it doesn't prove this interview is correct. It just means a church existed. It don't mean that Paul wrote the letters.
Yeah. Well, Jacob, I got to tell you, man, I've learned a lot, and I'm going to go back in this podcast, and I'm going to be looking at the sources that you've brought up. I can tell that you're very, very insightful on this topic, and I have not met an individual personally who has given so much work to this. And those of you guys who are subscribed to my channel, please, by all means, subscribe to Jacob's channel, because what he's presenting is absolutely groundbreaking. And, even if in a conservative evangelical worldview, this is almost impossible to refute. There's no, and to me, it's like the assertions that you're making are substantiated by, logic, by reason, by scholasticism. And, just bringing up the literature that you've brought up is absolutely groundbreaking. And I'm excited to see how this is going to shape and develop. I'm not sure if you ever debate on these issues. Maybe there's some scholars out there that you would like to have, a debate on. I think that, these topics are prime for debate. I just keep thinking that, like, okay, everything that you're presenting, it calls for, for debate. And, when it comes to debates, I think debates are absolutely beneficial, because there could be that moment, there could be that sentence, right? There could be that moment. Yes, they can be, because of that moment that even if it's a gotcha moment, that can definitely change someone's, viewpoint.
We all are.
Yeah. And so those of you guys that have been paying attention to this is absolutely groundbreaking. I'm honored, I'm privileged to, have learned from this. And like I said before, just not too long ago, it's been a while since I've sat back and I've actually learned something. and I've learned a lot. And I could just tell that you have dedicated yourself for hours in this study. And these are like blind spots. If I could think of something, it's kind of like a blind spot that, you know, even critical scholars have not really delved into. I'm excited for this paper, Jacob. When you do publish this paper, please, contact me, because if there's anything I could do to help propagate this paper,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, absolutely. We'll even, I'll promote it in our Facebook group.
We can
Uh,
do another. We can also do another longer show in which I can get into more details that we haven't covered tonight.
I mean, wow. I mean,
Yeah,
the fact that you even stated that you can go longer, it's been a good
yeah,
2 hours solid. And the fact that you can go
yeah.
longer shows, and I hope everybody is listening, it shows the level of dedication that Jacob has in his podcast. And there is a reason why that he is making so much noise. And to me, this is groundbreaking. I wish, Jacob, that I heard this 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Because if you presented this to me 20 years ago, you probably would have, changed a trajectory of my life. And if I
Yeah.
can say that, I know that others can feel that as well. So those of you guys that are in the chat, by all means, especially those who are subscribed to my channel, please, History Valley, I'll go ahead and post it in the description. By all means, subscribe to his channel, because this is absolutely groundbreaking. I'm excited to have another podcast on this topic. And I'm definitely going to go ahead and get some highlights on the things that you were stating and post it in our Facebook group, Preterist Perspective, which I believe you're still admin of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And of course, because, my channel has been dedicated for the preterist movement, and this, by all means, just shakes up everyone's worldview. And so I'm excited for this paper that you're going to publish. And if there's any means that I can, assist to propagate this, I'm always in your corner. I just remember, like 2 years ago, I remember seeing some of your clips. I remember I dedicated hours to just studying some of the content that you presented, and I have learned a lot. And like I said before, Jacob, it's been a while since I've sat back and been a student and have learned. I think I saw somebody in the comment section, they said, I need to take notes on this. That's exactly what it was. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to be taking notes on this, because you presented meat. Okay. It's like meat. How, when Peter said, to the saints, I presented milk, you weren't ready for the meat. This is meat, you guys. And so those of you guys that are in the chat, please take advantage of this, because this is golden. This is diamond. And who knows how this is going to shape and develop? Who knows where your paper is going to go? And maybe it might inspire you to write more, maybe publish a book. And again, you always have me in your corner, because this is absolutely challenging. And what you're presenting is foolproof. And I could just tell, Jacob, that you've dedicated hours upon hours in studying this. So I want to take my hat off to you, because I've learned something, and you pretty much made my day. So what can I say? Those of you guys that are in the chat, thank you so much for your attention. We have 77 people watching, and it's been consistent of 77 people watching. So you're absolutely changing someone's paradigm, at least challenging them. If you're not changing them, Jacob, you're challenging them, and by that challenge, they're going to go ahead and investigate more. And we welcome the pushback, ladies and gentlemen, because this type of collaboration is the only way that we're going to establish some justified true belief, and hopefully get some truth into biblical literature, and what is it that we're reading, and how it's shaping and developing our worldview. So by all means, those of you guys in the chat, thank you so much for your super chat questions. By all means, subscribe. Those of you guys who are subscribed to me, subscribe to Jacob Ehrman's channel, because I've learned a lot, especially back in 2020, 2021 is when I stumbled across. I don't know how you came up, Jacob, but it just popped up in my feed. I started clicking, and my goodness, I mean, I'm glad and I'm honored to have you on my channel. Any closing words, any final thoughts?
Sure. What I'll say is, for those that still believe that the Saulus and Josephus is somehow totally the same person coherently as the biblical Paul, you have to understand this is what you're vulnerable to critique. All an apologist has to do, okay, is to show you that Josephus does not describe Saulus in the same way the New Testament describes Paul. There's a lot of details missing there. And you're going to say, oh, they're an apologist, who cares? Well, I'm afraid they're right. On that, they're right. It would be right to point that out because it's not the same guy. And that's what you're opening yourselves up to if you claim that Paul, the letters, is somehow totally the same person without contradiction to be Saulus mentioned by Josephus. It doesn't work. The last point I'll make is we get the letters seem to be written around 94, 97 CE. They were written in 94, 97 CE by Saul of Escala and his co-authors, Timothy, Silas, Sophanes, and Tertius. They all put in their own views, reworking the historical Paul's theological viewpoints, embellishing them, turning Paul into the man they need him to be in order to help preserve and spread their churches in the 90 CE. They were writing under the duress of the second major Domitianic persecution. Major figures of their movement were being imprisoned and killed left and right. These epistles reconceptualized, rebooted the historical Paul to fit the needs of their early and growing church under the stressful time of the final years of Emperor Domitian. Anyway, Tristian, thank you for having me on tonight. This has been great.
Thank you, Jacob, and I'm looking forward to engaging with you more. Your channel has already gone places, and it's going to continue to go places. I'm excited to see what History Valley is going to go, and pretty much this paper. So please keep in touch with me, because if there's anything I can do to help propagate this paper, this is absolutely groundbreaking, and I've learned a lot. And those of you guys in the chat, thank you so very much for your attention. What can I say? I'm excited for what the future holds. And this is absolutely groundbreaking. And, the content that you have, just shared, with us in this podcast, I truly do believe it can change someone's life, like literally change someone's life in their discourse. So thank you so very much for your dedication. Real recognizes real. And anybody here in the chat, that Jacob Ehrman is somebody who is dedicated to pursue truth in an academic level, in a scholastic level. And, there is a reason why he is somebody in scholasticism. So thank you so very much, Jacob. I'm excited to see, your podcast prosper and reach the world, because I do view you as somebody who is world class, and your followers do as well. Your subscribers do as well. And anybody who subscribed to my channel, by all means, subscribe to his channel. And it's definitely going to make an impact on your life. And share the content, you guys. Don't just hear about it, share it, be a part of the movement, because we're all dedicated for truth. And how else do we, find truth? By not interacting, by not talking, by not collaborating, by not challenging one another. This is something that humanity needs in the 21st century. And so those of you guys that have been, listening to this, thank you so very much for your attention. You're helping shape and develop truth. And what can I say? I'm honored and privileged to have you on my podcast, and just to call you a friend. You're somebody who helped shape and develop, my worldview, and it's a privilege, and it's an honor. So thank you so very much, Jacob. I take my hat off to you, and by all means, I'm inspired to read much of the content that you've presented, and I hope that you continue to be dedicated and continue to be passionate in shaping and developing your craft. So thank you so very much, and thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tristian.
Thank you. Those of you guys in the chat, thank you so very much. And I'm looking forward to engaging with Jacob more. Somebody who has definitely made an impact on my life. And I know he's made an impact on your life. If not tonight, he definitely will in the future if you continue to listen. So by all means, thank you so very much, everyone. I wish you guys nothing but the best. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. And, go back, rewatch this. Take notes. He presented some of the scholasticism that's helped, support his assertions and a lot of his frameworks. And go back and listen, take notes. And I'm sure they can reach out to you. And, you guys can reach out to me. My email is in my description. And, Jacob is somebody who's out there, and he's somebody who will, contact you, and he'll interact with you if you reach out to him, myself as well. So thank you so very much. I appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to more content and what the future holds. Thank you, you guys. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and end it now. Yeah, I'll go ahead and end it now.
Thanks again, Tristian.
Thank you. And again, you guys, I appreciate your attention. You guys all have a wonderful night. And again, have fun, you guys. Life is short. And so by all means, have wonderful experiences. And hopefully, the content that we shared here tonight will help, change the trajectory of your life. So thank you so very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.